It's sort of a response video to Nick, sort of in the doom and gloom series, but more of a response to what maybe we could do to change things, in a constructive way. Presuming that things are going to get bad, obviously it would seem that we would have to become more efficient in how we function and how we live. Our work would have to be more productive. We'd have to take all the waste and nonsense that we have built into the system out of the systems. I mean, they'd have to be reduced to their simplest form, to knock out, like I said, any inefficiencies, because that's what's going to kill us in a hyper-inflation kind of environment where the real basics are going to have to be ensured. I mean, there's going to have to be some reliability in terms of people, the basics like electricity, food, water, the basic utilities that are partially regulated, but I think are going to have to be more strictly regulated. So anyway, getting into that, to one specific area is the internet stuff and even YouTube. So let's see if I can get away with even making this video because thinking about it, I mean, I've talked to this with some other people, but I haven't really said much about it. But I mean, when you look at what's happened to our free speech rights, to what used to be the public soapbox and this traditional notion of public spaces and people having this this concept called freedom of speech. And it was never absolute freedom, but it was certainly freer than the speech we have here. And it was certainly modifiable spaces. I mean, there were adult spaces and kid spaces, and they weren't owned by companies. They weren't marketing spaces. They weren't. There were spaces that we paid for directly. They were part of a direct public expenditure in creating those spaces. Parks and sidewalks and roads are all public accommodations. And in this information age, I mean, those public spaces really have been converted into cyberspace, and they exist now here on places like YouTube. This is essentially the public sidewalk, except it's not public. It's a private enterprise business, and we don't have any rights in this environment. And any rights that aren't given to us by the private corporation. They can do whatever they want. They own us, and they own our speech rights. They own everything about our conduct and behavior. And so we have nothing that's really you could classify as rights. And that's a real problem, I think, because it's I think the Constitution has to recognize, or does recognize, that this is a fundamental aspect of human existence, this whole conversation, this speech thing. And because the world has gotten smaller and this speech more organized and more disciplined, and in some ways louder, and it's in so many ways more powerful, and yet it's so limited because of this stupid corporate ownership. And it really has to be regulated as a public utility. I mean, we have to be guaranteed, if corporations are going to own it, the space, they're going to have to own it within certain limitations. And they're not going to have a right to do certain things and to play certain games. And, to be arbitrary about it or discriminatory about it or all this other crap that we're vulnerable to now. And it's sort of brought up by the Amazing Atheist and Captain Awesome, even though I hate them. Yeah, I mean, if they're being discriminated against just because they're atheists, well, that's bullshit. Or just because they say some four-letter words, well, that's bullshit. And it's not what our Constitution is supposed to be guaranteeing us. And this space really has to be our space. And if it's not going to be our space, then we should demand that we have a public space, that we have a public investment in the internet that replaces this fucking corporate bullshit. We deserve a public sidewalk. We deserve a public park, not a park that charges admission, even though we'd still have to pay for it up front. I mean, I don't care if I have to pay, you know, a couple $100 a year, you know, to have a right to go on an internet that makes sense and that gives me fucking rights. I'll pay it. You know, especially if it gives me the right to say fuck you to somebody who's shoving advertising in my face or banging me over the head with billboards, and the right not to have that abuse, because that's not what the public space is for. That's not what they have a right to do to our free speech. And you know, to be free of this corporate control is a powerful thing. And I would certainly argue, this goes to my whole argument about the internet, and you know, that unfortunately this fucking company is owned by a fucking company I can't stand that is evil, which is fucking Google. And you know, the whole idea of what they have done to the fucking internet just makes me insane. Because if any other company had done it, it would have been everybody would have screamed a bloody murder on the internet. Microsoft would have fucking put their advertising on everybody else's web pages. Everybody would have screamed. They did scream, because Microsoft even had a plan to do it, and everybody went so fucking crazy, Microsoft backed out. And then when Google does it, it's all okay, because Google's a funny name, and it's cutesy, and all this bullshit. And it's just, you know, Google's an evil fucking corporation, period. And they don't give a fuck about our rights, as they proved when they copped out on China. They'll do business with anybody for money, and they'll compromise any freedom for fucking money. And how could they possibly be an unbiased, how can we have any unbiased search engine when they're making money off people who are effectively spammers? They are, you know, there are people paying $50 per fucking, I think there's people paying even more than this, as crazy as it sounds. $50 for a click on a fucking link. They're paying $50. I mean, how can you know, how are we gaining anything from this fucking, it's a fucking tax, it can't be called anything else. I mean, Google's fucking, all this advertising money, this you know, $200 billion company is fucking built on, who's paying all that? We're paying it. The people using the fucking internet are paying it. And that's why we aren't getting any good deals on the internet. That's why the internet fucking sucks. Business isn't booming on the internet as it should be. You know, Amazon ends up building stores. Why does that happen? You know, because we're back to the marketing bullshit. The middlemen won. They own the fucking internet.